celebrate each of you. So thank you for joining us and committing this time. Now, you notice a couple faces on the screen. I want to introduce the team so you can see them before they jump off. So Rachel Peterson up in the corner, she's actually coming to us from Bend, Oregon, and she will be managing the technical issues. So if you have any challenges, we certainly recommend that you log off, come back on, that you can shoot her a message and she can work to troubleshoot with you. Teresa Peterson, no relation, with Rachel Peterson, is my partner in crime here. And so you will see her very involved on chat. I will bring her on as she will be observing and seeing what are some of the themes that come up. So we'll be hearing from her voice throughout this section, and it's really great. The other thing I have to say, because what wouldn't be a presentation during this time of pandemic if there weren't technical issues. So while we have everything set up, and I have my producer behind here who also doubles as my husband. It's a pretty good gig. We know that there's some work that our internet provider is doing. So if for some reason I drop out, please know that we are aware that something might happen. Teresa is familiar with this content. We'll jump in, and then we have a backup plan, so I'll be back on. So just know that if something happens, we have a plan for it. All right, so with that, let's jump in. So as Meg said, we want you to use this chat. I know you can all see me right now, and I'm just imagining you all, in your hopefully some comfy clothes, sitting at home, ready to dig into this work. But please use your chat, because this is how we connect with each other. This is how I get a sense of what's resonating, what are you curious about, what's becoming clearer for you. If there's something I say that you're like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense now, why I'm having a hard time sleeping, I just invite you to put that in the chat, because it's a way for us to build the connections, which right now we need to find whatever opportunities we can to connect with each other. So Rachel, I just want to do a quick touch base. On my screen, I'm seeing both of you, but is that how it's showing up? Nope. Okay, we're good. All right, technology. All right, so let's jump in, and I want to give you a chance to practice the chat. And this was a fun question actually that my colleague Teresa shared with us yesterday. If the year 2020 was a perfume, what would the smell be? So if you had the chance to design a perfume for 2020, what would the smell be? And I want you to just share that in the chat right now. For me, I think it would be a combination of the melted dairy that happened when our power went out at the bottom of our freezer that we didn't discover until a week later, with a couple pieces of glitter in, because there have been some highlights. So yeah, so the question is skunk. Skunk seems to be a popular a dumpster fire. I wish we could do GIFs on this. Yeah, just coffee and dust. There's something really, really provocative about just dust. Yeah, so with undernotes of a ripe outhouse. Yes, I appreciate that, Carrie. Yeah, on the bad side, manure, on the good side, flowers. Time to actually smell them. Tequila. And the hand sanitizer as well. A ripe teenager. That is a very descriptive. That and dust. Those might be good. So again, we're just having a chance to connect, and I don't know about you. It is what it is. Smell, whatever that would be. Part of the reason why I wanted to ask that is I don't know about you, but I feel like I don't get laughs as much as I used to. And sometimes I think we have to intentionally seek them out and create the space for us just to be present with the moment in a way that is playful. So yeah, so kitty litter that hasn't been dumped for weeks. Good. All right. So just a quick reminder that if you are putting things in the chat, to make sure you choose all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see it. If there's something you want sent just to us, you can just put panelist. But if it's something for everyone, please make sure you do panelists and attendees. All right. So thank you for that. And I hope that you had a moment of levity like I did. I miss laughing. This was good. All right. This week, I was a part of a panel, and it was with a number of other thought leaders who were exploring this concept of what role has the pandemic played on work and its impact on trust and work, and how do we show up with that. And one of the questions that the host asked right out of the gate was, do you think the pandemic has impacted, is work more human and more empathetic than it was before the pandemic? Do you feel the pandemic has caused work to be more human and more empathetic? And my response was, in some cases, yes, but what I think has really become clear is that what the pandemic has revealed is that work needs to be more human. It needs to be more empathetic. And again, we're all experiencing this incredible time where we are being challenged in ways we haven't before. So let me walk through what we will be covering today. And there's just a couple of key things that I want to spend some time on. So our roadmap today is we'll spend some time really understanding the relationship between emotions and stress. And some of this may be repetitive for some of you, but hopefully what I can bring is some insights and some science behind, oh, that's why I'm struggling so much. So for example, just a quick, give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. How many of you have had days where you're like, I don't even know what day it is? Where you're just like, you think it's Friday, but then you find out it's Tuesday. So this, this is happening pretty much every day. Somebody said in a presentation last week that every day feels like a Tuesday now. So why this happens is that when our brain is under prolonged exposure to stress, one of the first things that goes is our sense of time. They call it time collapsing. So I just these are the little bits of nuggets I want to give to you so that you can understand, oh, that's why I'm struggling with that. Oh, that's why I'm having digestion issues. Oh, that's why I'm having a hard time sleeping. So we'll spend some time digging into that. Then we'll explore, how do we be more present with our emotions? One of the things about building resilience is not about positive thinking. It's not about avoiding the emotions, but building that deep level of resilience requires us to be willing to sit with, stand in, acknowledge, and be present with our emotions. And because we're really in this together, we also want to spend some time to just explore, how do we be present with other people's emotions? How can we become people that people feel safe to share when they're struggling, when they're celebrating, when they just need another set of ears? So these will be the key things that we will be exploring in our time today. Let's just take an audit of just this week. We are going into month 6 of dealing with a pandemic that feels ambiguous at times, that feels uncertain at times, that feels threatening at times. We are in a place where we are having a reckoning with our relationship with racial justice and our systems in place that are perpetuating that, which is causing, another layer of stress for many of us. Also, just this week, the last couple of weeks, our country has had 4 or 5 major disastrous weather issues. You notice the glitch? I'm going to call this out. So if I'm catching myself or struggling, part of that is because my brain is real tired, right? We have these brain glitches where it's I just can't get the word out. So when that happens, we're oh yeah, right. That's what a brain in a pandemic looks like. But we have the fires in California. We have the tornadoes on the East Coast. We have the hurricane that's coming. We had the derecho a couple weeks ago. That there's a lot going on right now. And I want to take a moment and break down in a more specific way just to focus on what are some of the things we are being challenged with that are causing this. Oh yeah, Bernie, murder hornets. and locusts that just seem to be everywhere for my dog to eat. This is great for her because she loves tackling the locust. But so let's talk about and let's break down some of the challenges in a more specific way. So for the last 6 months, we have been in this space, whether we're conscious of it or not, that our brain has, that we are experiencing a potential physical threat. Even though the virus is invisible, we are aware that it could happen. It could impact us. It could impact our family members, our team members, right? So we're just living in this sort of constant awareness and anxiety. we've been experiencing different levels of grief and loss during this time. You know, think about when we first moved into this time period, that there is this incredible grieving of what does work look like now, and what, you know, grieving not being able to spend time with our families in ways. There's grief right now happening for those of you who are sending your kids back to school, that it doesn't look the same way. Your kids are experiencing grief. So we're in this chronic level of grief. Yeah, and Carrie adds, and we'll get to that a little bit, like we're also in an incredibly heightened, divisive situation as a country, right? We're ramping up to this. So we're experiencing anxiety related to it, fatigue. We have Zoom fatigue. We have decision fatigue. We have coping fatigue. We have ambiguity fatigue. How many of you, again, just give me a yes, of how many of you are noticing that you are fatiguing far faster than you did before? You find yourself more tired than you did before. You get to the weekend and you are just collapsing, right? So, and I appreciate you all sharing this, right? You see them come up, yes, and distracted and unable to focus. And we're still living in trauma. Yes, absolutely. More listless and tired. That's a really good description of that. Good. So as that comes up, I just want to, yeah, you're just noticing that things are more fatigued, and part of this again is we are under this prolonged exposure to stress. And again, whether we're conscious of it or not, our brain is very aware of it. So for those of you who are wondering, what's wrong with me? Why can't I snap out of it? Why can't I get back to normal? Part of what I want to do today is just to validate that it's absolutely, not only is it okay, but it's actually biologically just what's going to happen right now. So for those of you who have those moments of, why am I just so tired and I just can't get going? Well, congratulations, we're a human in a pandemic. Other things we're dealing with is the fact that we have to be on all the time. And what I mean by this is that we're constantly having to navigate and problem solve and be present in ways that we haven't before. Our brains normally spend about half of their day on pure autopilot, right? Where it's going through the motions, it doesn't have to use as much energy. And now we just have fewer moments where we get to be on pure autopilot, which is exhausting and draining. Some of us are experiencing loneliness, uncertainty, this ambiguity. And again, somebody mentioned the trauma, right? That there are elements of this, not only with the pandemic, but with the racial injustice, potentially with the devastation because of the storm, and also just your normal life experiences, that we are experiencing these little moments of trauma that have an impact. Now, I don't share this necessarily to, I don't want to add anything. I just want to acknowledge it and make sure that we're all giving ourselves some grace of, there's a lot we're managing. Oh, and we're trying to make sure our kids are educated. Oh, and we're trying to make sure that I have a healthy relationship with my spouse. Oh, and I'm trying to make sure I stay connected with my family. And I'm trying to make sure I'm moving my career, right? Like it's a lot that we're having to manage. One of the things that I think was an interesting research that came out just recently. So the Census Bureau does an assessment every year where they look at and they ask people to rate on a number of different criteria, self-assess behaviors that, depending on how the results come out, will be indicative of them experiencing what would be classified as a mental health challenge or a mental illness. And here's what's interesting is we have seen the number of people experiencing real, high levels of mental illnesses double in the last 6 years. So in 2014, when they ran this study, what they found was about 17% of respondents responded in a way that was indicative that they were experiencing things like anxiety, generalized anxiety, panic disorder, or depression. And what they found in July of 2020 is that number almost doubled, right? Sorry, I was taking a look at the comment that Christina mentioned. I hear entrepreneurs say they've never experienced mental health breaks, but the blows keep on coming and they feel, yes, on the verge of breakdown, right? Because it just constantly are having to work against those barriers that are coming up. So the thing that we have to keep in mind is that for everyone, we're in this heightened state of mental health challenges. I was talking with a client a couple weeks ago and they asked me if I could do a presentation or talk to their HR team about what I thought the world would look like, what I thought work would look like in particular post-COVID? I said, I can't answer that because we just don't know because we're still in it. But what I can say definitively and conclusively, that our needs to support and be aware of mental health challenges are going to increase significantly after this. So if we as people are not aware and educating ourselves, and we as organizations are not investing in mental health strategies, and schools are also not doing that, we're going to be in a world of hurt because of the consequences that will come during this time. Now, I feel like I'm not intending to be doom and gloom. I'm being a realist about this is what we're facing right now. And depending on your life circumstances, you might be facing something different. What we know is that women are reporting significantly higher levels of mental distress compared to their male counterparts, largely because they're still, in many situations, they're carrying the load of work, they're carrying the load of home, of their kids. Business owners are impacted in a really significant way. And then depending on your financial situation, that obviously also has an impact as well. So let's talk about the impact all this has and understand our brain on stress. So then we can move forward and go, okay, so what do we do with this now, Sarah? Like, oh, got it, Sarah. Now what do we do? So one of the things that I want to talk about is I want to introduce you to my favorite part of the brain, which is the amygdala. And instead of me talking about it, I'm going to send you over to pre-pandemic hair Sarah, and show you a short video to explain this important part of our brain and the impact it has on our stress. So I will have Nick take it away.
We know you're really busy, so we're keeping it quick. It's the manager minute or two.
We've all had conversations where we've left feeling like they just missed the mark. Why does this happen? Well, part of the reason has to do with our brain, specifically the amygdala. What's the amygdala, you ask? It's only Sarah's favorite part of the brain. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is constantly scanning your environment for threats so that it can move you into action, so it can protect you. Those threats might be physical, mental, emotional, or even to our ego. One of the ways I like to think about the amygdala is to imagine it's this shaky little neurotic chihuahua. It's shaking and it's nervous and it's ready to bark at anything that it perceives as a threat. Some of us have more neurotic chihuahuas than others. So what does any of this have to do with conversations? When our amygdala is triggered, it hijacks our brain. It pumps our body and our brain full of these chemicals and hormones that shut down parts of our brain. So we lose access to things like logic and reasoning, problem solving, listening, and empathy. All things pretty important to building trust. So when my amygdala is triggered, or when your amygdala is triggered, there's no way we can connect and build trust in the same way as when we're calm. So what do you do if you notice the amygdala has been hijacked in you or the other person? That is a really good time to step away, take a breath, and regroup when both parties have had a chance to breathe. Here's your challenge. I want you to do an amygdala audit. Think about a time when you had a stress response and think about what did it feel like when you were going through that. Because the more aware you are about your response, the more likely you can catch it when it's happening in the moment. And you're more likely to notice it in someone else. And remember, play fully brave. Did you find this? All right, so you learned about one of my favorite parts of our brain, which is our amygdala. So this is the part of our brain that is reacting when we are faced with, again, either at a real threat or even an imagined threat that puts us into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, right? It's what makes our heart race. It's why our necks get red. It's why we feel so fatigued because our cortisol has been spiking. And I want to pause and I want to check in and ask you, what do you feel when your amygdala has been hijacked? You know, for me, I know that I can feel my heart will start racing, my chest will feel really tight. What does it feel like for you when you are in that stress response state? And remember, the stress response, that amygdala triggers in 0.07 seconds. It happens before we're even conscious of it sometimes. So I'm curious, just put in the chat, what are things you feel when your amygdala triggers? Yeah. Just take a moment as these come in. These are humans who are writing these. These are human experiences. So it's easy just to read them quickly, but to just notice them. You know, somebody wrote defensive. And one of the things we have to understand is when we're in a heightened stress response state, we're more likely to move into a protection mindset, whether that's protecting me, protecting my family, protecting my team, instead of being in a more partner standpoint. So the person who wrote defensive, that is a spot on result of it. Yeah, alternating between rage and wanting to curl up and cry, I can definitely. The voice shakes, and part of the reason your voice shakes is because of that adrenaline that's rushing through your system, right? These are biochemical reactions that are happening. Yeah, potentially makes you feel like you want to, you know, lash out. And again, and we'll talk about this is why it's so important for us to think about and build up our resiliency, is because when our resiliency is low, we are far more likely to come from a reactive state, because that part of our brain is driving the ship. All right. So yeah, feel free to keep them coming, because this is just, it's really valuable for us to notice these and name them and to normalize them. You're not a bad person if you find yourself being a little reactive. You know, that the emotions are okay. Our behavior from those emotions may not be productive, but all emotions are okay. Your teeth hurt. I've never heard that one, but that's not to say, I mean, again, there's so many chemicals that are rushing. Somebody wrote foggy. And part of that reason is that when we are really foggy, that's because when all those chemicals are rushing through our system, we actually lose access to those higher functioning parts of our brain. So of course we can't think clearly. Of course we're losing our words, or we're having a hard time focusing. And Teresa, thanks for having my back on that it takes about 24 hours for our body to fully metabolize those stress hormones. So this is why, you know, if you are having a really stressful day, that you can't just snap out of it, that it takes some time for our bodies to process that. Thank you, Christina, for following up on that one. Because if you clench because typically we'll clench our jaws or we'll raise our shoulders. I've noticed I've had a lot of shoulder and neck issues lately because I don't even realize it, that I'm raising my shoulders like this. Good. Thank you all so much for sharing so honestly and openly. And I just want to give a shout out to the people who are acknowledging each other and having each other's back in this, because I think this is what we need right now. And the other thing that I want to, this concept to think about, is that stress is like this app that's always running in the background of our brain. So, you know, some of us have an app on our phone that there are times when it's running and it just is running so hard, it drains the battery and it crashes the system, right? That you just can't even do anything with it. Stress acts in the same way, that it's this app that's sort of constantly running, and depending on where we're at and what we're experiencing and how we think about that experience, it's either crashing the system, or it's maybe just coming on intermittently, or it's on in the background and you don't even realize it, and it is just slowly draining the battery down. I like this visual of thinking about stress as an app that's just constantly running. And so our goal is, we might not be able to turn off that app, but can we get it from crashing our system to just like being there and being present with it, so that it's not draining as much? When we think about being under this chronic time of stress, one of the things we have to be aware of is how it changes how we show up from, again, are we responsive or are we reactive? So one of the ways to think about this is, and I'll draw it out for you. We all have a baseline stress, like our based on neutral level of how we show up. So if this is my baseline of how, like, when I get to calm, here's where I'm at. What happens is that when we are under stress, this can increase, and now suddenly my base, like now I'm experiencing my stress levels are up here, and what I'm trying to do is eventually I want to work them down to get back down to my baseline. Now the challenge is that when we are under chronic levels of prolonged stress, as we're experiencing, is that it's getting harder for us to come down to that baseline. So we might not even be here. The next day we might actually be up here. And it's taking us longer and more effort to get down to this neutral level. And the challenge is that if we can't find ways to be able to come down to that baseline, the baseline starts to move. So instead of this being my baseline, if I can't find ways to come down to that, now suddenly my baseline is shifted, and I'm coming on instead of being more calm on a typical day, I might start to become more reactive, and that starts to become normal. So I just want to check in to make sure that that concept makes sense, right? That when we can't regulate, when we're unable to consistently regulate our energy, our stress levels down, to find ways to get back down to that base level, even if it's for a little bit of time, that eventually that base level starts to increase, and what is now the new normal is more reactive, it's more potentially combative or defensive, more fatigued. It can be a whole host of things. So what we want to, when we talk about resiliency, it's not about avoiding getting up here. This is human nature. We're going to have times when we get up here, but it's how can we work so that we can bring that energy level and get back to our base level. So,
Sarah?
Yeah.
We have a question.
Oh, yeah.
It says, given what you said, and given the almost constant level of anxiety, which seems to be constant without breaks, what might be the long-term physical effects to our bodies and to our minds?
I'm not a doctor. So I want to put that big asterisk, right? I'm not a doctor or a psychologist. I'm just somebody who's incredibly passionate about this work. So if there's somebody in the chat who has that background, please feel free to chime in. But I'll share with you what I do know that's not speculative. We know that the majority of our physical issues we experience are directly related to stress. I want to say the stat, and Jamie, you might have it off the top of your head from the work you do, but it's something like 70 or 80% of the reasons we go to the doctor are related to stress. So some of the things that happen when we're under chronic levels of stress physically is that it impacts how our heart works, it impacts our blood pressure, it can impact our digestive issues, our challenges, a lot of times, and part of that is because, again, the hormones that are getting kicked off. So if some of you are finding you're having weird digestion issues that you didn't have before, there's a direct correlation of the level of stress and those stress hormones. So it can affect us in a lot of different ways physically. And then obviously mentally, there are patterns that we can develop, right? I worry about that we may see an increase of agoraphobia as a result of this, because we've been so conditioned to be afraid of touching people or being near people. That there might be long-term physical effects. Here's what I would say for those of you who are interested in this. Teresa, I was just going to say it. Check out the work of Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Bruce Perry is a leading psychologist who specializes in the impact trauma has on our thinking, on our bodies, on how we show up, and his work is very accessible and he has great videos. So I would highly recommend checking that out. But we know that there will and can be long-term physical and psychological damages. I'm cautioning like giving too much just because that's not my medical background. So I just want to honor that.
Sarah, another resource people can check out, and I believe they're actually a sponsor of this, is NAMI.org, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They have a whole COVID-related section for resources and information pertaining to PTSD and long-term stress.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Rachel. Yeah, and it looks like Teresa just put that in the chat. So for those of you who are wanting more information, I think the thing that's really interesting for us to think about stress is sometimes we think of it just as a mental thing, and we don't realize that it has physical consequences, right? It has physical consequences to how our body works, how, just the health of everything. And so that's why it's so important for us to navigate it. And it's hard right now because we're constantly, right, coming up here. And that's why it's so critical for us to find ways, even if it's moments. And I was talking to a colleague of mine. He works out in Silicon Valley. So that's a whole different, series of challenge between trying to navigate the working remotely and navigating the fires and all of that. And we talked about how now it's, self-care, even if it's a micro moment of self-care, is incredibly valuable. Even if it's just a moment of being able to take a breath, even if it's a moment to pause, has significant impacts in our ability to be able to downregulate so that we can show up more powerfully. I hope that whoever answered or asked that question just want to, oh yeah, Mariah's on. She's the assistant director for NAMI. Good, thank you, Mariah, for putting that out there. Also, side note, for those of you who are only meeting Mariah now, she is incredible. She is an incredible woman, an incredible advocate for mental health, and somebody who I'm very honored to know and to love. So thank you for that, Mariah. All right, so we're talking about the impact. What I want to share with you is, well, let's do this. And again, I want to ask you to do a fearless audit. And that is that I want us to do a fearless audit, and I'm curious to know, what are some of the unproductive ways you've dealt with strong emotions? And I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. So here are some of the unproductive ways I've dealt with the strong emotions that have come up. 2 nights ago, I literally sat at my counter and I emotionally ate almost an entire container of chip dip. I was not even like savoring it. It was just mindful, and I just was cleaning that baby out. And I knew in the moment it was very emotional eating. Sometimes I can become reactive to people. I can become shorter or more judgmental. So I just want to invite you, and again, part of why I'm asking you to share this is not for shaming, but it's for normalizing that, that we're all having times where we struggle and maybe we don't always show up at our best. Yeah, so withdrawing, jumping to conclusions too quickly, that again, that reactivity is a really, really common one when we're in that stress response state. Withdrawing, I told my husband the other night, I said, I think I just want to go in a cocoon and just sleep for a while. Walk away and pretend everything's okay. Like, I just need to escape. I just need to convince myself that it's different. Potentially, oh, Julie, you are after my heart with those Oreos. Rachel can attest. She's seen the picture when I have my layout. Yeah, lashing out at loved ones, feeling overwhelmed, withdrawing. And again, I'm not asking you to share these for any kind of shaming, but to just acknowledge it, and for us to see each other and to hold space for each other, that we're humans. And sometimes as humans, we don't always show up at our best, or we don't know how to show up at our best. And so we have all these mechanisms to soothe ourselves when the stress level's really high. Yeah, avoiding the media, putting the head in the sand. And you see, like, some of these are not necessarily what I would call unproductive. I think some of these are, like taking a walk or avoiding media if that's triggering. I think those are really healthy, soothing techniques, right? To calm down. And that's part of resilience, is understanding what can we do to soothe us. Yeah, Kelly, went to the doctor because you were having headaches, and it was because you're clenching all day and you don't even realize it. I want to give a shout out. Well, I'll give a shout out. There's a woman, another person who's on this call right now. Her name's Allison P. And Allison, I'd like you to share your website. So Allison is a mindfulness-based stress reduction expert. She's one of the only trained in Iowa. And part of the work we'll talk about today is how do we be present. So I'll give another shout out to Allison so you can all follow her and connect with her. Yeah, your hair is falling out because of the stress. Oh my, Stacy. Again, it's very real what we're going through. And then you can see how that can create a loop, right? Like, then the stress can get compounded because now you're dealing with that and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And that also can impact how we feel about ourselves, right? And suddenly the stress is just layering on top of each other, which is why it's so critical for us to find these productive ways to soothe ourselves, these productive ways to build these resilience muscles of ours. Yeah. There's a really great quote from a doctor. His name's Dr. Mark Brackett. He does a lot of work in the education system, but wrote a really great book that's about how do we just feel our feelings. And I love this quote, and I'll give you a moment just to read it on your own. And that's, hurt feelings don't vanish on their own. They don't heal themselves. If we don't express our emotions, they pile up like a debt that will never come due. And, just like somebody asked earlier, what's the long-term effects of this? What we know is that it can cause physical illnesses. It can result in mental illness. Some of you are familiar. I'm very open about my own journey with mental illness. And in 2013, I was diagnosed with panic disorder, which meant I was having repeated episodes of panic attacks, which, for those of you who have never had them, they suck, and they're best described as experiencing a sense of impending doom. Sounds fun, right? But what was so interesting about it is that I had moved from this incredibly stressful work environment, working 60, 70 hours a day, doing work that wasn't in alignment. And I moved into this incredible company, and it was about a year into this change where I was the happiest that I had ever been. I was the most relaxed I had ever been. And so I was so confused why I was developing this panic disorder when I was like, why didn't it happen before? And what I learned is that our bodies hold on to stress for about 2 years. It physically holds on to stress. And so once I got to relax and, you know, my body was like, okay, time to feel everything that you bottled up for the last couple of years. This is why if you know, there's certain assessments they'll have you do when you're getting tested for different types of mental illnesses and diagnosing, is they'll do a stress a questionnaire, and they're asking you in the last 2 to 3 years, have you changed jobs, moved, lost a loved one, right? So we have to understand that this is all, the longer we hold on to it, eventually there will be some sort of debt to pay. All right, now all this said is that we are incredibly adaptive. Like, this is the thing that is incredible about humans, is that we are unbelievably adaptive, and we are able to be incredibly intentional about our relationships. And so I just want to take a moment and pause a little bit on emotions, right? And how by understanding them, we can regulate them better. One of the most pervasive and destructive beliefs we have in our culture is that there are good emotions and there are bad emotions, and that it's okay to chase and it's okay to, you know, want to hold on to the good emotions, but the bad emotions we shouldn't deal with, or we should choke them down, or we should avoid them, or we should dismiss them. But here's the thing, emotions aren't good or bad, they just are. Now, there are some emotions that feel good and there are some emotions that don't feel good, that are uncomfortable. But the whole human experience means we get to experience both of those. And so one of the things that for us to think about is to realize is that we have this tendency to overvalue the positive emotions and to undervalue the negative emotions, right? When they just are what they are, like not good or bad, they just are. The other thing that's interesting about emotions is that when we're in them, it can feel like we're never going to get out of them. But what we know from research is that emotions pass like within 90 seconds. It'll move on to something else. That doesn't mean we might not stay there, we might not go back there, but emotions are temporary, even though they might not feel like that in the moment. In fact, that mantra is a really important mantra when I'm struggling in the moment with something, is to remind myself what I'm feeling right now is temporary, right? So that I don't get caught into it. So as you've learned, there's power in naming them, knowing you're not alone. And so let's talk about this idea of emotional resilience. And I love this quote and this definition. So I'll give you a moment to read it. So it's the strength required to adapt to change. It acts as our internal compass so we can successfully navigate an upset. And I really appreciate those last couple of words, that we are not avoiding an upset, we are working to successfully navigate an upset. Again, because our amygdala triggers so quickly, we can't always stop an initial reaction, but it's how can we show up in a way that we can recover, that we can not dance around it, but that we can move through it. And one of the things that's so important when we think about resiliency is, and again, this is based off of the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, who we mentioned earlier, is that we all have a bucket, and this bucket is filled of, resilience energy. And when this bucket is full and we are more resilient, we are able to respond to changes, to challenges, to conflicts from a place that is more responsive. It is more reflective, right? Whereas when this bucket starts to drain, just naturally, again, because of how our brain is wired, when it's low, that's when we become more reactive. We become more protective. We might become more aggressive. And so this is why it's so important for us to increase the level of our resiliency, especially now as we're navigating all of these changes. So let's talk about what are 4 things we can do to build. Well, actually, let me pause there and let me see, what has become clear for you in that information that I've shared so far. or what, either what has become clear for you or what has been interesting, and what are you still curious about? I'll take the quiet on the chat as people are contemplating. Oh yeah, that there's ways to self-correct or self-heal, and we'll talk about some specific ways. Yeah, the residual stress it's a real thing. Yeah, Christina, I want to highlight what you said, that, in 2 years post this, people will still be suffering the impacts and potentially longer, right? And again, think about that, again, when we think of trauma, we think of it as like this really severe thing, when trauma can be like trauma little t and still have an impact. People who have lost loved ones and haven't been able to properly grieve together, that can be a form of trauma. Not being able to be with your loved ones, that can be a form of trauma. That this is why it's not just what's important now, but what are we prepared for coming out of this? Yeah, that it takes 24 hours to get out of your system. This is why when you get into a fight with your spouse or your partner and you feel better because you slept on it, it's not because you slept on it, it's because your body has metabolized that. Okay, good. So let's talk about what are some things we can do. And I want to highlight 4 specific strategies. And again, Terry, I want to put a pin in that one, and I want to come back to that because that's a big question. Rachel, can you make note of that when we have a little bit more space for questions?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. So here are some tips for resilience. So the first is feel it, don't fight it. And I'll go into more detail with each of these. So let me walk through these. That part of building up a resiliency muscle is our ability to be present with our emotions in a way that is non-judgmental. And I know that Allison Pete out there is smiling at this, right? Coming from a place of non-judgmental awareness and curiosity and compassion. So don't fight it. Don't try to push it away, but to feel it, to notice and to name it, right? That there's power in us being able to say, yeah, I am angry right now, or I am feeling depleted right now. And again, just to notice it and name it and to honor it. This is one of my favorite ones. So I'm going to spend more time on the top 2, but these second 2s I just want to touch on real quick. Right now, especially right now, this seems strange because our Western belief, our American culture is very much built on this idea of chasing the hustle, right? You gotta build the business. As soon as the shutdown happened, there was a series of just horrible tweets that were, showing up, or memes that were saying things like, if you don't come out of this pandemic with at least a side hustle or learning a new language or building, or I don't know, like learning a new instrument, it's not because you didn't have time, you didn't have motivation, or whatever the case is. And I call BS on that because if you come out of this time rested, being more connected to what's important to you, like that is what's meaningful. So we have this culture of chasing the hustle, but the reality is that we know that under the prolonged exposure to stress, we just fatigue way faster. So what would it look like to expect a little less from yourself? And that doesn't mean to give you permission to just like throw it all to the wind, unless that's what you need. But that, and I see this in teams and companies we work with, that there are companies that are like expecting the exact same level of productivity. And I just don't know how that's possible when you have 2 parents who are both working from home, who have 3 kids under the age of 5, how that is even possible without there being a significant cost to those people who are impacted by it. And so what does this look like? What can this look like? This idea of expecting a little less. For me, I've had to really be okay that I can't spend 12, 14 hours a day making sure I get everybody's email responses. Have my email responses been a little bit delayed recently? Yeah. And I'm having to be okay with that because it means that I need sleep, right? The other thing that we can do to build resiliency is to do something familiar. This is from the great work of Dr. Bruce Perry. And how many of you have found yourself going back to movies or rewatching TV shows that you've watched before, right? Like what are some of the shows you've been watching or movies you've watched that you've watched 1,000 times, but you're finding yourself really drawn to? I'm just like, throw them in the chat. What are the things, like Friends, right? Scrubs, Park and Rec. My husband and I, we've been finding ourselves on Saturday morning, literally going like, what are some of the cool cartoons we used to watch, and finding those online. Old classic Friends. Yep. Oh yeah. Big fan of Schitt's Creek and Alice and Pete. Get real excited about the new Bill and Ted's. Real excited about that one. But part of the reason our brain is drawn to that is, again, we are not on autopilot a lot right now. And it craves that time to not have to think or to take in new information. So a really simple and powerful way we can start to build up that resilience reserve is to do something very familiar, right? Whether that's something to watch or a game to play or a hobby that you have. So that's a simple practice we can do to start to build it up. Yeah, Ghostbusters. Rereading favorite books, exactly. So again, that it's our body is drawn to that because it's craving just some time to breathe and to decompress. But one of the ways we can intentionally build up resiliency is to seek it out, is to say, you know what, tonight we're going to order the same pizza we've always ordered. Because I just don't want to have to think and process through all the different options. And, we're going to watch, A League of Their Own, because that's always a good classic in our family. All right, so I want to dig in a little bit to the feel versus don't fight. One of the things that is a pervasive belief is sort of, again, this hyper focus on positivity. And I would call it toxic positivity. And I want to be very careful when I talk about this, because holding a positive mindset is very productive in many situations, right? There's, and I wrote this down so I can get it right. But there's this a woman, and I didn't capture her name, shoot. But she's a clinical health psychologist. And so she describes it as, think about positivity or positive mindset like ice cream, that it's good sometimes and it's good in little quantities. But if you're eating a whole bowl of it eventually, or if you don't want ice cream and somebody's trying to like shove it down your throat, like it's too much right now. So this idea of this hyper focus on positivity, or what we'd call toxic positivity, is when we're unwilling to acknowledge, be present with, and be with the emotions that can be uncomfortable. And we say things like, well, it could be worse, or just look on the bright side of life, or whatever the first world problem, Sarah. And again, in some ways, a positive mindset can be really productive, but there comes a point where it crosses the line and it can actually create shame. I know people who are on such a mission for happiness that every day they're not in that zone all the time. They're feeling worse because they're creating this sort of meta emotion about emotion, saying, oh, well, I just can't figure it out. And now they're angry, or they're feeling shame because they're not happy enough. So the other thing is Stephanie Preston. She's a professor of psychology at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And this one that was really provocative for me, because I catch myself doing this all the time. She says, when we use statements like, it's fine. How many times have you been in a conversation where you've said or somebody else said, and they're talking about something they're struggling with, and then they quickly wrap it up and they go, but you know what, it's fine. It'll be okay. It's fine. And what she says is that when we are saying that, when we're really in a struggle and we're saying that, what we're doing is we're stating that there really isn't a problem. And we're also, more importantly, shutting down the possibility for further contemplation. So I just want to pause on that. I think that was really provocative for me to realize how often I will say things like, well, but it's fine. Like it probably will be. But for right now, it's hard, and it's okay for me to say it's hard. The other thing we have to understand is that what research shows is that, and Brett Ford, he's an associate professor out of the University of Toronto, and they did this study in 2018 where they wanted to see the relationship between emotional acceptance and psychological health. And what they found consistently was that people who habitually avoided acknowledging those challenging or uncomfortable emotions ended up feeling worse. They either were numbed, they felt shame, they moved to things like alcohol or other means to be able to continue to numb and avoid those emotions. Whereas people who tended to not judge their emotions as good or bad, but instead tried to just have a better relationship with them, consistently had better mental health across the board. So what does this look like to feel, not fight? Here's a couple of questions that I like to ask when I'm struggling with an uncomfortable emotion and I'm trying to not, like, I want to fight it because, you know, I get into the wishing pits. My good friend and speaker, she's a phenomenal speaker, Rachel Sheeran. We were talking about how when we get in these cycles of, oh, I wish I didn't have to deal with this. Oh, I just wish I didn't have so many technology issues. I wish. In psychology, we call that grasping. And, yes, Elaine, let me finish this thought and then I'll come back to that. So we call it grasping, but Rachel calls it the wishing pits. When we get into the wishing pits of, oh, I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I wish we didn't have to deal with that, right? But instead, how can we just be present that, yep, this is what I'm experiencing right now and it's okay. So Elaine, I just want to repeat what I said, that when we say things, it's fine, what we're stating is that one, there really isn't an issue when we know there is, but two, that we are shutting down the possibility to contemplate that problem and how we'll handle it further. So we have denied that there's a struggle and we've shut down the option for us to even explore how we will resolve that or move forward in that. So hopefully that came through. And if not, you can shoot me a message and I can send you a text. Okay, perfect. So here are some things we can say to help us think about, you know, to feel the emotions rather than fight them. And the first one is, what am I learning in this moment? And this can be a hard one when we are really triggered. This was a critical one that became an anchor for me when I was in the midst of my panic attacks, because you can imagine that the sense of losing control can feel very overwhelming. You go, oh, here it comes again, or oh, I'm dealing with it again. Why do I have to deal with it? Getting into those wishing pits, right? Of like, oh, I wish I didn't have to deal with this. Instead of taking a deep breath and going, what? Okay, so what am I learning about how I experience anger? Or what does it feel like to have anger in my body right now? Or what does it feel like to be so overwhelmed? And I know me saying it now is very calm and cool and collected, but what I will tell you is that this is a muscle we can build up, that we can even just, because what it does is it creates a little bit of space. You know, it's a space for us between what happens and what we're experiencing. And in that moment, it's that moment of reflection. So asking yourself, so what am I learning in this moment about what it feels like to be fatigued, what it feels like to be sad? And the other thing is to just give ourselves permission that, yeah, it's okay that I'm feeling this way. And again, I'm not saying to stay, you know, in or to get stuck in it, but to have a genuine curiosity and compassion about what you're experiencing. That, you know what, it's okay that I'm feeling this way. I think that I wish this phrase that was said more in conversations, that if somebody were to share a frustration, that the other person would say, you know what, Sarah, it's totally okay that you're feeling the way you are. Just to validate it, not trying to fix it, but to just be present with it. Some of this work is also based off of this idea of acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the metaphors that they use in this work of how do we show up and be more present with our emotions is to think about it like a beach ball. And so whenever we have those uncomfortable emotions, that sometimes what we do, if you imagine you're floating, right? You're just sitting there, you got your noodles under you, keeping you afloat for those of us who can't tread water. And this negative emotion comes in the form of a beach ball. And when we try to avoid or deny or dismiss, it's like taking that beach ball and pushing it underwater in hopes that it'll go away. But what happens when we push a beach ball underwater? The more force I use to push it under, the more force it's just going to pop back up. But instead, if we're present with it, if we allow it to exist there for the time it needs to, eventually what happens is that this beach ball that's causing all these waves and splashes eventually starts to settle. Eventually, I can see it out of the corner of my eye, and eventually it starts to move away until it's no longer impacting my experience. I love this metaphor of, am I shoving it down so it's just going to pop back up and hit me in the face, or I'm just coexisting with it? And again, you know, one of the practices that's really great for building our ability to feel and not fight is mindfulness. And so again, Allison, I'm giving you all the opportunities to promote. So I didn't know she was going to be on. So, but I love lifting other people up. And Allison is somebody who I worked with to develop my mindfulness practices, and she offers online programs. And it's just a great way to be able to build this muscle, to be non-judgmental, to be curious, and to be compassionate when we're dealing with things that are hard. So feel, not fight. The next practice is just how do we notice and name? And it's connected to that. But how do we notice, just even being aware? Because again, sometimes we're on autopilot so much that we don't even realize that, you know, we're experiencing things. But to notice and to name, and again, just to label and go like, oh, okay, like I'm exhausted right now. So here's a really specific practice I want to introduce to you, and we'll practice it today. And it's a simple method called the STOP method. And that is, so the STOP is the acronym. So it stands for stop, take a breath, observe, and then proceed. And I would have a stop sign up at my desk to just remind me in how to stop, take a breath, observe, and proceed. So I invite you in this moment, I just want you to pause, stop, take a deep breath, and I want you to observe, what are you feeling right now? And I invite you to share it in the chat. So just noticing and naming. So go ahead if you feel comfortable to name it in our chat. So noticing some anxiety about a grant report due, some quiet, some peace. For me, I feel like a settling, just tired. And again, you see how when we just sit with these without judgment or trying to push them away, frustrated with technology. Oh, Joan, I hear you loud and clear on that one. Nothing triggers me more than technology not working. Resolved, antsy, never sit for an hour. Don't sit, Rachel, stand, move around, do what you need to do to be you. Yeah, noticing tension, right? Like this is the noticing and naming, that even just noticing. So Debbie, just by noticing the tension, did you find that it released a little bit just by noticing it? Because a lot of times that's, you know, what will happen. Good. All right. So that's one of our practices. So I want to pause and just check in to see what questions do you have, or what thoughts do you have from those 4 practices that I shared. Okay. All right. So if you have questions, please ask them. Yeah, feel, don't fight. So often we do try to repress, and it's just not, yeah. It's something we have to unwire in ourselves because we've just been conditioned this way, right? It's the, you know, boys don't cry and just suck it up and do what you need to do, instead of like, no, it's okay that I'm feeling sad right now. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about before we'll open it up for just bigger, you know, questions is this idea of how do we show up powerfully for other people when they're struggling. And again, that as we work to become more resilient, I think that this is a group effort, that we can help each other and we can support each other in this. So one of the concepts that I just want to introduce to you is this idea of the difference between being emotionally supportive versus emotionally dismissive. And so this is a practice. Let me bring up the screen. So sometimes when we want to be helpful, we can actually be unintentionally emotionally dismissive. And what that looks like is we minimize feelings, we negate feelings, or we want a quick resolution. And again, this doesn't make you a bad person. Some of this is that sort of toxic positivity I talked about earlier, but that if I'm sharing a frustration or struggle and your intention is to make me feel better, your intention is to take care of me, is that, well, you know what, Sarah, everyone feels that way sometimes. What's the impact on me? Like, oh, okay, like I don't know how to take that. Or to negate feelings. Well, you know what, Sarah, could always be worse. You know, at least you only had your power out for 4 days and not 10 days. And now suddenly I feel like a jerk for struggling to begin with. Or wanting that quick resolution of just like, just look on the bright side of life. And again, I want to be very clear. I tend to lean heavily optimist. And so I will fall into this trap sometimes where I want to be helpful, but what I'm doing is unintentionally being emotionally dismissive. So what does it look like to be emotionally supportive? So to be emotionally supportive looks like this, that we validate all feelings. Yeah, Joanne, I do the same way, right? First world problems, which like, again, your intention is like, it's really not a big deal, which sometimes might be exactly what that person needs to hear is a perspective. And so I'll share with you how you can still offer that perspective in a way that doesn't feel dismissive. So if I share that with you and you're just in your head going like, it could be so much worse, first world problems, you say that is unintentionally dismissing me. But what you could consider saying is when I'm struggling, like when I'm in a situation like you are right now, I just try to remind myself it could be worse. The reason that using this kind of language is more supportive and not dismissive is because you aren't telling me, you aren't shaming me, you are offering it up as a possibility, and you're giving me choice of whether or not I want to hold on to that perspective or not. Does that make sense? To say, when I find myself in a similar situation, for whatever it's worth, I try to remember or I try to remind myself it could be worse. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes I can't hold on to it, but you offer it up as a possibility instead of giving it to them as a prescription, right? That's the difference. So emotionally supportive, yep, there it's back on. So you validates all emotions. I can see why you're angry. Now here's the thing with validation emotions. You don't have to agree with them or why they're upset. Understanding why, why somebody might feel the way they are doesn't mean I have to agree with it, right? So we can hold space for somebody when they're struggling and not necessarily be entangled with it. Seeking to understand, I think the 3 most powerful words we can say when somebody is expressing some sort of mental health challenge or struggle they're experiencing is simply, tell me more. Say more about that. I've never been in that situation. Would you mind sharing what it's like? And then just be quiet, because it's not your job to fix or solve their suffering. It's our job to just hold space for it, to walk alongside them. I don't need to lead them. I just need to walk alongside them in it. And then the other is just guiding that emotional regulation. And the reason I use this language is because sometimes we can't regulate ourselves. Sometimes when we're so triggered, it's hard for us to find the path out of it. And so just asking people, what do you need in this moment? What have you done in the past that has been effective now? What's the best way that I can support you? Now, I will say that sometimes people might not know, or they might not feel comfortable asking. But it's a way for us to help guide them. And here's an important thing, especially those of you who lead people, is that sometimes, again, because we believe that emotions are good or bad, they're not, they just are. However, the emotions that are the behaviors that come as a result of the emotion can be unproductive. So here's what it looks like to coach somebody, maybe your kids or even your spouse or your team members, is that you can acknowledge and honor the emotion. And this comes from the work of Brene Brown. It's okay that you're angry. I'm going to honor that. It's not okay that you keep shutting me off. It's not okay that you keep interrupting me. It's not okay that you slam that door in my face or whatever. right? So we can honor and acknowledge the emotions. It's okay that you're feeling frustrated right now. What's not okay is that you didn't answer my call when whatever the situation might be. So that's a really beautiful phrasing for us to show up emotionally supportive when the behavior is unproductive. So hopefully that's valuable. All right. So I just want to connect with you, and I want to, touch base about this idea and hear, when are times when somebody has been emotionally supportive to you? Like, what did they do that told you you were being supportive and not dismissed? So I'll give you a moment to think about this, of just what are examples of what it looks like for somebody to be emotionally supportive. So I'll just give you a moment to think about that. And then I would love to hear from you either in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can bring you online so that we can hear your voice. But yeah, listening and not trying to fix it. Just listening. Yeah, asking those really good thought-provoking questions. And I don't know, Kelsey, about you, but when I think about those questions, they're not asking questions for them, they're asking questions for me, right? They're asking questions for me to think through things. They're asking questions for me to explore it. Yeah, eye contact. Okay, yeah, good. Giving place to feel. That's an important distinction when we talk about, this idea of asking questions for them. A question for somebody who's suffering is just, what's been hard about this? What have you learned through this? A question for me might be, so what have you already done? Well, that might be a question for them too, actually, now that I say that out loud. Good. So I want to pause and give you a chance, and I just want to check in as we, wind down our time together. And, again, I invite you, if you've been sitting this whole time, please don't. Please stand, walk around, do what you need to do. I was standing, now I'm sitting. But I'm curious what has become clearer for you, and what are you still curious about? And Meg, I wonder, Rachel, if we bring Meg back on the line and we can have some conversation together. Yeah, people start to heal the moment they feel heard. I love that, because ultimately all we want to do is we want to be heard, we want to, be seen, and we want to know that we add value. So what if any questions do you have? What are you curious about? Or even Meg, if there's anything that came up for you from, what you know about this group that might be valuable for us to explore.
Sarah, I don't want to, I made note of the question that was asked earlier that you said.
Oh, yeah.
I'll read it again.
Thank you.
Do you have thoughts about grief resulting from lost relationships, not only because of separation, but also because of ideology concerning politics, racism, etc.?
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge the use of the word grieving, like grief, because it is a loss. Grieving doesn't happen only when somebody dies. It happens when they're no longer part of our life in the way that we're used to them being part of our life before. And so it's, so be okay that you might follow and experience the levels of grieving, right? You might be angry, you might, you go through all of those different levels till you get to a point of acceptance. But I think that recognizing that, again, loss doesn't mean just loss of life, but it's loss of the relationship, it's loss of habits, it's loss of the connection, it's loss of, a whole host of things, and that it can evoke a very similar grieving response, depending on the level or the quality of that relationship or how important that was before. I don't know if that answers it. Those are my thoughts on it, but just to, honor that. And it's hard. Like, that's part of what's hard about, this time is we're in a massive time of values clarification as a result of the pandemic, as a result of, right, the racial injustice and all of that. And we are seeing, it's an interesting time. Companies are becoming clear about who they are, or they're showing up in ways that are showing who they really are versus who they, say they are. Meg.
Thank you, Sarah. What a great hour this has been. So thank you for that. And thank you to all of you who've been in the chat. Keep it coming as you have other ideas or want to share. I just want to back up and maybe share some additional context of why we sought out Sarah to be here today. At the partnership, a large part of the population I work with, and some of my colleagues are on here today too, are our small businesses. And so some of those folks, you know, beyond, I'm thinking we've got so many people that are frontline on this pandemic. We've got actual health providers and lots of folks that fit into that. You know, if you're a retailer, if you're working a grocery, if you're in that any type of the food supply chain, you know, you've had to keep pushing and have a different experience in this than some of the rest of us. And in particular with some of our small businesses, you know, some of this impact is going to mean that they don't have a path forward. And when you created something and now you may have to give it up, that's so we were really thinking of that. I don't know if you want to address that. And even knowing, you know, we also had caught wind of a small business owner who committed suicide, and just folks knowing that that there are other options, even if it feels at this moment like it's a failure. It's not. There's a pandemic. You could do everything and move heaven and earth, and it wouldn't. So it's not on you.
I think that's a really good, that's a really good point that I think is important for people to understand. Even, you know, whether you're a business owner or you lost your job because your company was downsizing, but that if something negative happens to you as a result of this, that is in no way a failure of you. It is just an unfortunate, like, consequence, right? Because it's unlike the financial crisis, which the pandemic is impacting all of us as humans, but the pandemic isn't impacting businesses all equally like the financial crisis did. Because you have some industries, like you're saying, service, restaurant, right, retail, that is being decimated right now. You have some that are stable, and then you have some that are just thriving just because of chance. They just happen to be in it. And I think it's really important to honor and recognize that the loss is real, but that is in no way indicative of the failure. But I think that, you know, Christina, just to highlight her comment, is when we are struggling with change, it's not the fear of change, it's the fear or the reality of loss. And so being able to name that, being able to, you know, navigate that is so important. Yeah.
That's great.
There was a question that I wanted to honor that came up that was about helping children navigate worry. And Teresa, I wonder, you know, so Teresa has a background in education, and so I can give some thoughts, but I'm guessing that Teresa is a professional educator who has her doctorate in education, might have some thoughts as well. But that, oh, look at you and your sweet glasses.
A pandemic side effect for me has been eye strain with
Sure.
blue light. Yeah, I want to say that question came from Julie. I was following in the chat. What a time to be a parent, right? I mean, like, the joke about being a parent is like, I didn't read this in the manual, you know, kind of thing. And now it seems like even a worse joke than normal. From everything I read, both professionally and as a mom, and things I'm hearing from other parents who are educators, my neighbors who are physicians, as much as we can help focus our attention on building that resilience, right? That this is stressful, that feeling that stress is normal, but there's nothing wrong with them, you know, for feeling that. If I'm remembering right, your daughter is, or your son is at school, your daughter is at school. Yeah, okay.
Going off to college.
Yeah, I mean, sure. There's several good books. If you want to, you know, get, like, we could have a book chat if you want, Julie, you could message me. But the one I put in the chat earlier, but The Danish Way of Parenting, which is all about how to build resilience in young people, how to help them reframe emotions. to see possibility, to feel empowered, right? And so letting your kids and ourselves, right, grieve that things aren't going how we want them to go, while we acknowledge that this won't last forever. And so in the meantime, how do we build those muscles, take care of ourselves, have that awareness that we may feel the impacts of this for a while. And then within that, it's like one day at a time, right? Just one foot in front of the other. So no quick answers. I drew a blank on, there's another wonderful book about building resilience in kids.
Well, maybe if you think about it, we can share it. We can post on social. I think that, one of the things for all of us is the storm is here.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Meg.
Oh, no,
No,
go
I
ahead.
want to honor.
Well, I was just going to ask you to also just speak to those who have been in a position where they have had to let staff go.
Oh.
And just the burden, the guilt that perhaps kind of just sticks with you if you've had to be that messenger, but also those who have been on the receiving end of that, and again noting that it's not them.
Yeah, it's this tension when you want to be a compassionate leader, and you also have to make tough business decisions, and you also have to hold people accountable. And it feels like a razor's edge we have to walk, where it's like inevitably we'll get cut up, and inevitably they'll get cut up too as we navigate this. But I think that unfortunately it's something I have had a lot of experience in previous positions, is again, just remember this is a human that's in front of you. And every company is different and has their own things, like regulations of what they can say and what they can't say. So I need to honor that. But to remember that this is a person in front of you that is having a significant life change. But as you as the leader, and I think this is something we don't always focus on, is that like while letting somebody go is horrible for them, it also can feel really horrible for you. I remember the first time I had to ever let somebody go, and I felt like I was at a funeral. I was that level of emotional exhaustion. I remember going back to my director's office and I just wept. I knew it was the right thing, but I just wept because I just felt so bad, even though I knew it was the right decision. So I think that, what's important is how can we can be candid and compassionate. Those aren't on either ends of the spectrum, right? We can, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, Teresa, I know how you're feeling. It's really hard for you. I don't know how she's feeling. She's the one being let go, not me. Yeah, which you're not. But like, but we can be compassionate. And I think a couple of traps sometimes we fall into is, one, we try to say like, I know this is hard for you. You don't understand what they're feeling. And so that can be unintentionally dismissive. Or what I've seen is leaders make it about their own discomfort instead of just, being more direct about it. But it's and then if you're on the receiving end of it, again, depending on the situation, it's allowing that grieving period. And then when the time is right, okay, who am I going to be in the storm? Like that's when I started talking about the storm. The storm is here. I can't control the storm, but how do I want to show up? Who do I want to be in the storm? Was that what you were looking for, Meg? You just want to. But as leaders who are having to make these tough calls, or business owners, whatever you can do to find people who understand your challenges so you can speak openly and honestly with them, so you can be messy with them. I think sometimes we feel like as leaders or business owners, we have to have it all put together, and we have to, and we need places and spaces for us to feel messy too, because we're humans.
It's a messy year, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. I have one last quote, or unless you have another question, I was going to transition it to you to talk about the next thing. Well, so two things. One is Rachel will go ahead and copy in the chat, but we have a couple of resources that we want to share with you if you're interested in it. So you can she'll put in a link, and for those of you who sign up, but there are a series of stress response cards. And so what they do is they highlight what are the common stress responses we see, what you might notice in somebody, and how you can respond positively or supportively in those moments. And so we're happy to send that out as a resource. And then I just want to, there's this lovely quote that is one of my favorites, especially related to our time. And it's from the work of Susan David. And it's that life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. And when we talk about being emotionally resilient, it's that there's duality in emotions, there's connectedness. You don't get to experience, we experience loss because we experience love. We experience hope because we experienced fear. And that instead of, pushing those aside, that if we can sit with those emotions, that we can be present with them, we can experience the full, beautiful, complex, messy human condition that we get to all experience. So with that, Meg, I'll turn it over to you to take it from here and let them know what's coming up next. So thank you all so much for your attention and presence today.
And what Sarah didn't put in the chat is a link to sign up for a newsletter she sends out, I think, every Friday. Lots of great, again, reminders and tips and things like that. So I'd encourage you to all subscribe to that as well. I may have Rachel just tap over to the next slide here. I want to make sure that you guys are aware of the resources. There are lots of resources out there, which is a really great thing about where we live. So we mentioned the folks that have come together to support Make It Okay, at the Mental Health Anti-Stigma campaign, but specifically I want to call out NAMI. There was a representative from NAMI with us today, a terrific organization. Make It Okay has its own website. You are welcome to join on there. There's also a hotline, Your Life Iowa. You can call or hop on to yourlifeiowa.org for some counseling. ACEs 360 is a really fascinating research project about trauma and empowering folks who have experienced trauma. There's also, the state has created COVID Recovery Iowa, which is online free counseling as well, open to all Iowans who are experiencing challenges during this time. So we just encourage you to seek it out.
Meg, I'm gonna share those real quickly. Rachel.
Oh, good, thank you.
So I want to, yeah. So I want to go back and share those. Is this where you want to be?
That's the one. Yep. So there's a quick snapshot of those resources. So yeah, you're not alone. So so please reach out and make some of those connections. On that next slide is just a reminder that this is part of a series that we're hosting. This is installment number 2. We are skipping a week here because we have Labor Day coming up. So would encourage you to find some time to check out and rejuvenate yourself over that long weekend if you can, but come back and join us on September 10th, where we'll talk about Make It Okay at work. From there, we'll do a Make It Okay with One Economy, which is a report on Black Polk County. We'll dig into the arts after that, and a general Make It Okay during COVID. All of these registrations are online at dsmpartnership.com/events, and they're all free. So we'd love to have you back. And then we'll just close again with a reminder, I think, to be compassionate with yourself and with others. We are all in this together. We are all experiencing just a lot this year, and to make sure we offer each other grace. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.
Be well, everyone. We'll hang out and smile as they, send off.
Do we have
on their
closing
way.
music or anything?
Yeah, I was gonna. I don't know.
Oh yes, Rachel's experiencing some technology problems.
I can just start playing my piano, chopsticks.
I won't sing. I'll spare you that.
Thank you all so much. Have a really great day. There it is.
Bring me down, can't none bring me down. The love is too high to bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof.
Teresa, you kind of look like that little girl on Despicable Me.
Amazing.
So I have motion censored lights, but because I'm sitting on the floor, like in the corner of my office.
It didn't turn off. I was waiting for you to wave your hand.
I knew it was too far out of range.
Meg, somebody asked a question, Rachel Bardwell, and she might not be on it, but she was wondering if she could have access to the recording.
Okay.
And so that is something that I would be comfortable making available, and we can post it,
You
but I want to
would?
check with you. Yeah.
Okay, I was under the assumption that no, but if you are willing to do that, I would love that. And maybe
Yeah,
we
well,
put a little blog to push it out, or
yeah, what we can do is we can host it